no surprise.
No surprise.
Yellen front and center.
Absolutely. And, you know, with a list like this, there probably aren't going to be that many surprises because, by definition, if they're influential, we probably have heard about them.
Yeah. So no surprise, therefore, that the Chinese premier's pretty much at the top of the list as well.
Slow down or no slowdown, it doesn't really matter. He still matters. So he comes in number 2 behind Janet Yellen.
If you were taking a long view of the world at Longview Economics, Chris, would Yellen sit right at the top of your most influential? Is she the person pulling the strings?
If she's not at the top, she'd be very close. I mean, to me, almost all roads almost always lead to the Fed these days.
Yeah.
So even when you're talking about emerging markets or you're talking about, you know, the state of the world's financial markets, the Fed is front and centre. So I think she's always got to be there. Whoever's in charge in the Fed, top 1, 2 or 3, for sure, yeah.
And then Tim Cook.
Well, here's, you know, he doubled Apple's profits,
Yeah.
doubled Apple's revenue since Steve Jobs, so he's thought to have been doing a pretty decent job.
Does that surprise you a little bit? I know he's doing a decent job, and I know he's but in terms of you look at the kind of who's disrupting the world right now. If you look at kind of how the world is changing, Apple actually hasn't generated many new products over the last few years.
No,
yes, it's influential. Yeah. Yes, it dominates in terms of its sales. And you look at what happened with the iPhone 6 and 6S and the sales there. But is it influencing?
Well, yes, it is. I mean, it's influencing. Look at its competitors. Look at them trying to catch up. You can make arguments. One of the fun things about putting this list together is that nobody agrees.
No, I'm sure.
And you end up with a list that's basically we start with a huge list, which is basically compiled with all the Bloomberg News reporters around the world, and we eventually narrow it down to this. And there always are some quirks. There are a few quirks, but not that many.
Where's Europe?
Well, Europe is probably where you would expect it to be, which is the U.S. dominates for the reasons we've been talking about. Europe, it's there. There are Europeans on the list, but it's interesting to see who they are. It's Angela Merkel.
Yeah.
It's Christine Lagarde.
Yeah.
So they're there as much for any other reason as Greece. They're there for having managed that situation. Europe is, it's not been a great year for Europe. We do have some Europeans on the list. I mean, Anna Botín of Santander is on the list. And there are some others.
George Osborne makes the list, but not for the most obvious reasons.
No, I mean, there's one that maybe fits into your category of sort of cutting edge in a way. Maybe we don't necessarily think of him that way, but he has helped to promote an industry, particularly in London, fintech, that is increasingly important to London. You know, as the mainstream bank jobs fall, fintech is rising at quite a high rate, and so he gets credit for that. Obviously, it's not all down to him, but he gets some credit for it.
Can I come back to Yellen and explore that a little bit more? I'm going to kind of include both in the conversation. Is Yellen's credibility really in question at the moment?
Certainly, in markets, people are asking lots of questions about the credibility of the Fed. Will they be effective? And the idea they may even go back to another round of QE, far stretches that may seem to some. Whether the markets would regard that as credible and whether Yellen's therefore credible within the mix. But, yeah, I mean, it's a tough job. I think it's a very difficult job, and all Fed governors' credibility gets questions at some stage.
If they don't hike, if they completely miss the cycle, if Hilarian's right and they should have raised rates a year ago, where does that leave Fed credibility with the bond market?
Well, you know, I mean, but this is a bit like this sort of vigilantes comment. I mean, the point is we live in a structurally deflationary world. So I don't think it changes their credibility dramatically. It's just understanding the world we live in and what they have to deal with. Basically, the world is very indebted. It's not been the US this time. It's more overseas, and the Fed sits at the centre of that. And that's the challenge, I think.
Stryker, do you think kind of influence and credibility go hand in hand? I'm not sure they do.
Well, I think
Well, they must be related,
They have to be related, but it's a fair point, because some credibility is often not determined until quite a long time after the fact, whereas influence could be determined.
It's real time. Yeah,
it's very real time, and it could be totally wrong. With Yellen, for example, we're really not going to know, are we, until down the road quite a bit as to whether her timing, whatever it is good or bad.
Yeah. And I would say, actually, if she did raise rates, and actually that might work against her credibility, because we may find the markets don't take it very well. So paradoxically, it may be better for her credibility if she doesn't raise rates at this juncture.
The whole world is geared up for the Fed raising rates.
Yeah.
And OK, you can get Churchillian about this and say, you know what, the facts have changed. We need to change our view on this. But nevertheless...
But ironically, the facts haven't changed. The point is people are looking at the wrong facts.
OK,
the world's
fair
become
enough.
much more indebted in this economic cycle, and it's dollar-denominated debt, and the world can't take interest rate hikes. It's just the models are wrong. Their way of thinking about the world is wrong, or it's too narrow, it's too US-focused. If the US was an island, you could raise rates, no problem. But it's not. It's a global economy. It's Greenspan's line in 1998. You know, eventually we've got to take account of what's happening internationally, and I think that's where the Fed's at the moment.